How do you account for the apparent erosion of United States influence in the UN?
I have been disturbed at what's taken place. I've been disturbed at the resolutions that they've passed. I've been disturbed that these countries seem to enjoy taking money from us and then kicking us in the teeth. I've been disturbed at the shortness of memories of some of these countries that we've helped over the years every time they were in trouble.
Be sure to watch Dialogue with Litton on this station when Missouri Congressman Jerry Litton and his guest, California Congressman Phil Burton, discuss some of the critical issues facing our nation. Congressman Jerry Litton believes that a democracy depends on informed people. He also believes our government should be more open and accessible to the people. To better inform you of what is happening in your government, Missouri's 6th District Congressman Jerry Litton invites Washington personalities to come to Missouri each month and join him in an unrehearsed, question and answer, open to the public town meeting to discuss key issues facing our nation. Dialogue with Litton brings you closer to your government and Washington closer to you.
Are you ready for another dialogue today? A lot of congressmen react to things that happen in Washington. And then there are some congressmen, like our guest today, that really make things happen. As chairman of the Democratic caucus, of course, he's the third ranking in leadership in the House of Representatives, behind only Majority Leader Tip O'Neill and the Speaker of the House, Carl Albert, both of which, of course, have been on this program. It's expected that when Majority Leader Tip O'Neill moves into the Speaker's role as the Speaker steps down, that our guest today will be the next Majority Leader and eventually Speaker of the House. He has the kind of drive and direction and determination and leadership that we need in the United States Congress. And more importantly, he has the kind of leadership we need in a leadership role in the United States Congress, and that's why I suspect he'll be the next Majority Leader and the next Speaker of the House. Let's give a good Missouri warm welcome, California Congressman Phil Burton. Phil?
I'm really delighted to be here, and all of you are inordinately fortunate. Jerry Litton not only serves his constituency in this state, but our nation with dignity and integrity and intelligence. But I suspect of equal importance, he's made the most successful effort to bring Washington and some of us involved in the decision-making process as close to his constituents as could be and make us available to you for whatever questions you may ask of us, and I'm here for that purpose. Thank you very much.
We have microphones around the room. We'd like to ask that you come forward to ask the question, and please give your name and town, if you would, before you ask the question. Question back.
My question pertains to the FBI and the recent abuses that have been disclosed by the hearings and so forth. 15 years ago, it was almost heresy to question the integrity of the Bureau, and it appears now that those few that did probably understated their case. I understand that Congressman Litton has a bill which has been or will shortly be introduced along these lines, and I would like both your comment on how you think the Bureau can be controlled, both the Bureau and the CIA.
First, we all must understand it's vital that in any society such as ours, we do have an intelligence community. We need intelligence here at home, and we obviously need intelligence in terms of assessing what our policies should or should not be abroad and what the policies of our friends and non-friends alike are. Having said that, the events and revelations, if you will, of the last several months have confirmed the worst almost of the fears of a number of people and have reminded all of us that the test, or really the price of liberty, is eternal vigilance, and we must construct some kind of meaningful restrictions on our intelligence community to the end that the liberties of the American people are fully protected while they exercise whatever their function should be. I hope that is sufficiently responsive. Jerry, do you have
The question made comment to a bill that I'll be introducing, Phil. I've been concerned about the power and the abuse of power of the FBI and the CIA for a long time. And then when you pick up the paper and you find out that perhaps the FBI was indeed involved in trying to discredit people such as Martin Luther King Jr. with bugging and wiretapping and letters that were sent to destroy his marriage or the marriage of other people, to try to replace him with their own black national leader of their choosing. These things have to disturb any of us. And the bill that I will be introducing when I get back simply says that no director of the FBI or CIA can hold that term for more than 10 years. Now, J. Edgar Hoover served as director of the FBI, I think, from 1924 till he died in 1972. That's nearly 50 years. And when you mention his name in Congress, and I understand even when it was mentioned in the White House, it caused feelings of fear among presidents as well as senators and congressmen. I don't think we ought to permit anybody to be in charge of an agency that powerful for 50 years to build up something bigger than the Oval Room of the United States Congress. 10 years restriction, I think, would give us some protection we don't now have.
I fully agree with that. The fact of the matter was, I was in the Congress when Mr. Hoover was still a director of the FBI. He had been in office so long that, in fact, he was feared by the most powerful people in the country, including those holding our highest offices, elective offices. And in our scheme of things, that simply doesn't make sense. And I do think the long term of with one person holding that office contributed immeasurably to that. And I do think, in the interest of all of us, some term limit would well serve the country.
Could this be extended to Internal Revenue Service, Jerry? Would your bill go that far?
Well, it doesn't go that far, but the history of the IRS is such that none of them hold that office very long. I've introduced a bill, as you know, maybe they shouldn't. I've introduced a bill, as you know, that restricts the powers of the IRS, and 5 former commissioners of the IRS testified in support of the concept of my bill, and they did not span too many years of service. So apparently the commissioner of the IRS does not serve in that capacity very long. Usually they take that office for a couple of years, long enough to know something about the IRS, and then they open up a practice somewhere and charge people a substantial sum of money to figure out the IRS laws they help write.
You know, on that point, and I've mentioned this to some of our colleagues on the Oversight Committee of the Intelligence Community, of all the agencies, the one agency that does lend itself to more real abuse for more of our people than any other is the IRS, because they have virtually all of us in terms of their files, at least all of us that file our income taxes. And I do hope one of the great positive aspects and results of this these investigations over the past several months will be some bringing to heel, if you will, and putting under more traditionally fair ground rules the role of the IRS vis-a-vis the average American taxpayer.
You see, Phil, one of the problems is we in Congress have the habit of creating an agency and then turning around and walking away from it and never really caring about that agency until 20 or 30 years later, until it's made some major abuse, and then we come back like a neglectful parent looking around to try to point our fingers at somebody for the child going astray, when maybe it went astray because we weren't the guardians of the product we helped create. And I think more oversight over IRS, CIA, FBI, to see that they do the things we intended them to do is perhaps in line and will come out of all of these hearings.
Would your bill and Jerry get into the control of this computerization to which we're all subject? In other words, this could come from down in the ranks, the abuse, and this is what's giving a lot of people concern.
Well, the bill that I introduced with regard to the Internal Revenue Service, which is due to come out of the Ways and Means Committee in about 30 to 60 days, simply says that the IRS is there for one purpose, and that's to collect taxes to run our country and not to collect information on the private lives of the American people to turn over to whoever's in power, be they in the executive or legislative branch. Now, the Justice Department and Commerce and Census and some of these others are not too excited about it. Some of the congressional committees that have had the opportunity to look into tax returns of individuals are not too pleased at it. The White House, that has had the power and the authority to reach into the IRS to get information on those that oppose their particular view, are not excited about it. But I have the co-sponsorship of over 2/3 of the entire Ways and Means Committee that will consider the bill, and 244 over half the House. So I've got the bills to get it passed. I think the President will sign it.
I hope so. Thank you.
Question back here.
Saturday was the anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy 12 years ago. There's groups throughout the country wanting to reopen the investigation, not believing the Warren Commission was totally correct. You two in favor of that?
I've not supported that to date. I've not supported reopening the Kennedy assassination. I'm not that intimate with the Kennedy family, but I was one of the very few that supported Bobby Kennedy in his effort in 1968. I find myself shifting my stance somewhat. I may well opt to request my colleagues in the House to take another look at that. I'm fairly close to that now.
2 weeks ago, I didn't support it, but after what I've seen in the paper about the FBI and the CIA, the fact that we may indeed have tried to assassinate the leaders of other countries, and the fact that we've tried to replace, apparently, with the FBI, such people as Martin Luther King with the choice of the FBI, these things would cause me to say, let's take a second look.
As a government teacher, what, in your turn as a coming leader in Congress, would you offer for Congress to internally change or reform or modernize so that they could meet challenges in the future?
I think we will have to continue to make an effort to open up our processes so they can be more readily perceived by the American people. And I think we have to enormously strengthen our in-house capability by use of computers and data retrieval systems and staff and expertise to give us a fighting chance to deal with the army that the executive branch has when we contest on the wisdom or lack of wisdom of a proposal.
Let me say that I don't know of anybody in Congress that's been more effective at attacking the seniority system than Phil Burton, and I've heard people say to Phil, well, Phil, that's not the way it's been done in the past, and I've heard him say that doesn't make any difference, that's not the way we're going to do it now. Right. And I think it's about time somebody in Congress stand up and say, look, the way we did it 100 years ago may not necessarily be the effective way of doing it today.
Jerry Litton's proposal to bring somewhat into a responsive arena the Internal Revenue Service wouldn't have had a prayer in the climate of the past. Wilbur Mills, a fine person, would have said, I'm sorry, our committee will work on that. You're not on the committee, and these ideas will be processed by the committee that has jurisdiction. This is a new day where we hope, and we've demonstrated significantly to date, that an idea whose time has come, if you get someone who's willing to put the work behind it, will have a decent opportunity to be heard and a fair prospect of approval, because we've changed the ethic. We now say ideas and people in the House must be dealt with on their merits, not out of some fiction. If you've lived to be 88 and had been reelected for 48 years, that of itself makes you the only oracle of wisdom.
I find it humorous in a very sarcastic and bitter sort of way that the United States, through the State Department and Mr. Kissinger, have armed some of our potential enemies, such as the Arab countries, with sophisticated new arms systems that were supposedly reserved for our own forces, and yet we're giving them away to the Arabs before our own generals and our own troops have a chance to get at them.
I personally am a very strong supporter of the State of Israel. It's the only democracy in the entire Middle East. It has essentially a very just society by virtually any measurement. And there are some 2 or 3 million Jews surrounded by Muslim countries of some couple of 100 million. I am troubled about the giving of arms to the Arab states. I can't, on balance, justify our arms sales abroad. I do not care whether or not it improves our balance of payments a little. I am concerned that all too many of the conflicts in the world, we find that it's American arms on both sides being used by the combatants. And that's a state of affairs that I find essentially unacceptable. There are some actions in the particular I might support, but as a general thrust, I agree with the tone and tenor of your question.
I think it bothers anybody to realize that two things. American government for many, many years has found it necessary to try to buy peace everywhere and to buy friendship everywhere and to buy two warring nations, to hold them apart and say, now, if you will just be peaceful for a while, we'll see that each of you are given enough money that you'll agree not to war for a few more years, and then they use that money or funds to buy more armament, and we find them involved in a deeper and bigger, more costly, bloodier war 3 or 4 years hence. And it doesn't make sense to think that a good way to buy peace is to give more armament to two warring nations.
There's one other aspect to this that troubles me a great deal, and that is the more military hardware we provide an incumbent government or regime, the more we're tilting the internal processes of that country away from any real prospect that the civilian side of the argument, if you will, or the difference of opinion, have a chance to prevail.
How much longer must the American people hear the debate on the energy issue before we have a decision? And is the issue in that the oil lobbyists work harder than the caucus does?
Well, I like to note that because of the caucus, we eliminated the oil depletion allowance for all the giant oil companies of this country, much to their surprise. On the energy issue, the Congress has been chided, and it's somewhat fairly and somewhat unfairly, because we've had difficulty constructing a rational whole approach to energy. I would like to note that the fight over the last several months has been clearly with Ford on one hand saying there should be no limit at all to the price of oil, under the misbegotten notion that the oil companies made enough money somehow we'd all be better off, and the Democratic insistence that if we pulled the lid, we'd have a great leap in inflation and a big increase in unemployment, and that simply was unacceptable. We've won the bulk of that fight if the bill gets signed. If it gets vetoed, I'm in no position then to say what we'll do, but then fight it all over again in terms of continuing the current situation.
You know, when you get down to the problem of energy, where there's so much regionalism, this is really a place where the executive branch should have shown its leadership.
Right.
We try to tax snowmobiles, and the congressman from Minnesota and Wisconsin oppose it. You tax air conditioners, the congressman from Texas oppose it. You tax inefficient automobiles, the congressman from Detroit oppose it. There's so much regionalism involved. This is really an area where the executive branch, with all of their expertise, talent, people, manpower, and money, should have come forward with a real program and a package and said, here it is. It's not the best for Texas, it's not the worst for Minnesota, but here's a total program. But the president did not pursue that kind of a program at all. He stood up and said, I have a program, Congress has none, and his program is the same one the Arabs have, the same one the major oil companies have, and that's raise the price of everything.
Right.
And he didn't address himself to the fact that we've got to discourage the wasteful consumption of non-essential fuels in those areas where there is some kind of elasticity of demand, where people will back off from buying as the price goes up. The president never came up with that kind of a program. I think Congress did, but I think they were much too slow in so doing.
Well, Jerry, you're right that this was a very difficult very difficult one for us to put together because by and large, Republicans opted out. We received virtually no Republican support on any one of these solutions and therefore had to try to find 218 votes out of our 290-member Democratic side with all the regional differences that you've just described, and it was a very, very difficult one. Through the whole course of this last several months, the end product is, I am told, passably decent, and we're led to believe the president may well sign it.
I mean, just simply add that there are many petroleum products where raising the price will not cause people to back off from buying it. Gasoline for farmers, they have to have it. How high do we raise the price of gasoline before the farmer parks the tractor and quits planting? At what point does that take place? And when that takes place, what good have we done for anybody?
Right.
And these are just many areas of petroleum usage where you can't raise the price and get people to back off. You just pass the extra price right on to the consumer.
Right.
And that is overlooked when you raise the price of everything.
Yes, I'm Sue Murphy from South Platte County. Two quick questions for you about the UN. How do you account for the apparent erosion of United States influence in the UN? And do you think Congress will continue to fund it as fully as they have in the past?
I have been a champion of the United Nations. I am aghast at the irresponsible run-amok conduct of the General Assembly. We have a great number of these mini-states. By mini-states, I mean countries of 60,000 or 240,000 or 1 million that, for whatever reason, have demonstrated increasing irresponsibility. I would say that if the United Nations General Assembly majority, as you know, we have a General Assembly where all nations, large and small, vote, and then we have a Security Council that has 11 members and 5 members are permanent, and the United States is one of the permanent members, and the permanent members have a veto. If they continue to behave this irresponsibly, the support in the Congress is going to recede. I think that would be a lamentable result, but I think it's taking place. And they've acted in such a manner that I, who've been an ardent champion of the United Nations, am now somewhat of a lukewarm supporter. They've shifted me that far in the last year and a half. If there's any comparable shift among my colleagues, the United Nations had better decide it should be a forum for responsible discussion, responsible debate, and feasible proposals, not acting out the heritage of real or imagined grievances of 3 centuries ago.
I've been a supporter of the UN too, but I moved from a supporter to lukewarm, and the water's starting to get awful cold right now. I've been disturbed at what's taken place. I've been disturbed at the resolutions that they've passed. I've been disturbed that these countries seem to enjoy taking money from us and then kicking us in the teeth. I've been disturbed at the shortness of memories of some of these countries that we've helped over the years every time they were in trouble. I'm disturbed at the fact that 143 nations belong to the UN, and we now contribute 25% of the total cost of operating the UN. I'll introduce, and have introduced, I might add, a bill that will cut back our contribution from 1/4 to 1/6. And I think we have to keep in mind also that not only do we pay 25% of the total cost of the bill of the operating the UN, but we pay from 40 to 80% of the cost of many of the voluntary programs. 59% of the total cost of the UN program for humanitarian aid to Bangladesh, the United States taxpayers picked up. 73% of the UN volunteer program, the United States taxpayers picked up. This last year, the UN program for drug abuse control, 83% of the total cost of the program the American taxpayer picked up. And I think it's about time that some of the other 142 countries in the UN started picking up their share. I don't think they have, and I think we need to make some changes. I think it ought to come from Congress, and I'm ready to vote on it.
Just today in the paper, there's a suggestion that the United States should not have military bases in Guam. Guam has been a member Guam is a part of the United States of America. People born in Guam are United States citizens. They elect their own governor. They have a delegate that they send to the Congress of the United States that has about 98% of whatever may be considered to be the rights of a full member of Congress. What business is it of the UN to tell the United States that a part of the United States should or should not have military bases? It's none of their damn business.
I noted that we have 143 countries in the UN. That last year, over half of them, 73 of them, were negligent in paying their payments. 30 million of the 60 million that was behind in payment was from Russia. 1 million behind in payment was from China. And the UN was short of funds to operate on, partly because Russia and China had not paid their money. And do you know who they asked to pay in advance and who paid in advance to keep them running? And that was the United States. And I would suspect that that ought to come to an end as long as the UN has continued to be used as a dialogue and a format in which to kick us in the teeth all the time. We should stop trying to buy friends and start gaining their respect, and I think they would admire us a little more than they have. And Phil, I really want to thank you for coming here, and you've been very kind, you and your wife, to be with me. And I'm a great admirer of you and the work that you've done in Congress, and I wanted the people here to get a chance to meet and see Phil Burton, because they're going to be seeing an awful lot about Phil Burton in the future.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I'd like to say this, that if we stand for anything, our Democratic Party, it is at first, we're the party of the big umbrella. There's room for people of any and all political persuasions to work in our party. And if there's any partnership that our party represents, it's a partnership between rural and urban America. If we have a strong rural economy, those of us that live in the city are going to have enough food to eat and have the kind of economy that's going to make us successful as well.
Among our guests coming up on Dialogue with Litton in the months ahead will include Hubert Humphrey, who currently is leading in the poll for the next nomination for Democrats. We'll also include Franklin D. Roosevelt, Jr., son of a president who had an awful lot to do with John Kennedy being elected president. Right. And it will also include John Anderson, who happens to be chairman of the House Republican Conference, the third-ranking Republican in the House, and I think you'll have to admit one of the most articulate members of the House.
He's a good man. He's a good man.
So we're going to have a lot of interesting guests coming up. I hope you can join us. These meetings are free and open to the public. I hope you can come. If you can't, I hope you tune us in on the more than 30 radio and television stations around the Midwest as we again and we continue to bring government to the people. Thank you.
Each month, Missouri Congressman Jerry Litton invites a well-known Washington figure to come to Missouri and join him in an unrehearsed 2-hour question and answer open to the public town meeting. This has been a 30-minute edited portion of this month's meeting. Dialogue with Litton is presented monthly on this station to keep you better informed about your government.